Hi, my name is Peter Pomerantsev. I am the author of most recently This Is Not Propaganda, which is a book about propaganda, and it has a unicorn on the cover, which is maybe the best thing about the book. I run a little sort of think tank at the London School of Economics called Arena, which investigates disinformation campaigns and also thinks about what we can do to counter them.
Peter, thank you for joining us. What motivated you to write This Is Not Propaganda?
I was trying to work out for myself, actually, something very personal. I spent the early 2000s in Russia seeing kind of a propaganda model emerge that was strikingly different to ones in the past, which was based not about proving the truth, but kind of on seeding doubt and claiming that facts don't matter. That was full of nostalgias, right, rather than trying to sort of establish any idea of the future. And then I came back to sort of Britain in sort of mid-2010s. And then, lo and behold, 2016, I saw so many of the things that I'd seen in Russia in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, which already in the late 1990s manifest themselves here. And I was just, full of this dread deja vu mixture of deja vu and dread. And I just wanted to understand for myself why. Why did the future arrive first in Russia? Was I just seeing things? Was something systemic going on? And what do we do about it? So it really came from that personal sense of being weirded out by what was going on around me. But, obviously it's more than a personal narrative. I as part of my research at the LSE, I'm very into the question of what do we do about what's known as post-truth politics. So, the book writing was also a form of research.
As your own analysis evidence and your own life evidences, disinformation can be culturally specific, but speaking more generally, how is this contemporary age of disinformation different from the propaganda of previous years?
Sure. So look, disinformation, let's define that as like purposefully false information. So look, we've always had that. We've always had propaganda. There's nothing new in that at all. However, before, political leaders would try to make their lies seem like facts. They're trying to con us. If you look at the Soviet propaganda of the late 20th century, if you look at the great deception campaigns of the British and the Americans, they're always trying to take one fake reality but convince us that that's the reality. Now, like Trump and Putin and other leaders, they don't even try to pretend that their lives are particularly believable. They kind of go, fuck the facts. It's okay, that's all. Okay, fine. And that's a slightly different thing. That's a slightly different thing. They're not even trying to convince us. And people accept that. I mean, this is not just a one-way street. This is not just like shoving lies in people's lives, so to speak. It's also people accept that, and they also seem to like it. So what's changed in us to be able to accept these kind of characters? I mean, why is the fact that Boris Johnson lied twice, was it once or twice, as a journalist, lost his job, why is that okay? I mean, how is he even near the center of our political discourse? Why are people ready to accept that?
The counter is, yes, politicians are lying to us, and yes, they're not pretending like they're not. But are there not ways in which disinformation now is less easily discernible than it was previously, particularly with the rise of technology, particularly with social media, those types of things?
So without a doubt, there's a technology factor going on here where, we always used to think of censorship as, practice through squeezing the information space. And now you have political campaigns which kind of flood the zone with such a mixture of misinformation, soft facts, disinformation, trolls, bots, that people are just overwhelmed. And in this world of kind of where there's just too much information out there, they kind of retreat into comforting little emotional pockets. And there is an ideology out there which these leaders play on that, the truth is unknowable, it's also confusing. Bojo might be a liar, but he's fun and cuddly and he appeals to me. So yeah, so there's a bit of that going on, I think, as well. But that's partly there because of the information space, but then that sense is also cultivated, that the truth is unknowable, that you'll never find the real facts. In the way Donald Trump always kind of goes, some people are saying you don't really know, can't really get to the truth. Putin's been doing that for many years, cultivating doubt, rather than cultivating persuasion as such. So that is definitely a factor, and I think technology, without a doubt, is a massive factor of what's going on. But I think there are cultural issues as well.
So do people believe the disinformation that they're being told, or are they just turning a blind eye because it confirms the narratives that they have an interest in?
Could be a bit of that, or I think there's actually a pleasure in rejecting factual discourse. I think there's a joy in saying, bugger off to the facts. There's an anarchic kind of liberation from glum reality. The facts aren't very pleasant. They tell you that, at the end of the day, that you're going to die. So what I think Putin and Trump and all the rest of our what are known as post-truth politicians tap into is this kind of anarchic release. And also, look, they're peddling nostalgias. You don't really need factual discourse to prove nostalgias. Nostalgia is by its nature, wispy and ethereal and really not to do with any kind of reality. So factual discourse isn't particularly profitable for them just as a form of narrative. Nostalgia is rooted in kind of vague emotion.
Particularly in the developing social media landscape, how can we discern between what is targeted and organised disinformation propaganda and good faith beliefs of people who may simply disagree with us?
Well, exactly, we can't. That's the whole problem. I mean, for all the information we have at the moment in terms of content, we actually face a different form of censorship. We don't understand how the material we see, especially online, is created. We don't understand if something is, a confused person, or actually a coordinated mass campaign, a cyber militia, or an online mob that has been designed and created. We have no idea. So I think, that's something that really has changed, and from a regulatory aspect, I think certain forms of behavior online have to become regulated and illegal. So I think that's something that has to change. We have to be able to tell the difference whether something is orchestrated or whether something is genuine.
How can we determine which conspiracy theories or what might be conceptualized as them merit further investigation?
Yeah, that's it. Say, look, there's been loads of studies about this that, everyone has the conspiracy theory that confirms their own biases. We see it all the time. But still, I think there are communities that, even if they slide towards conspiracy theories because they can feel nice, you can still just about challenge them with the facts. So, they might have you can still engage with them, while others are kind of off the scale. And it's very hard to engage them. Which conspiracies deserve, conspiracies in the terms of a criminal conspiracy to organize something happen all the time. It's called an organized crime. Conspiracy thinking is the problem, when we just start explaining everything through conspiracies. So I think we can make that divide. I mean, look at the Mueller report in the US. It was to find a criminal conspiracy. So I think we probably have to sort of differentiate between the genuine search for evidence, which is open to factual challenge, and the belief in the conspiracy that explains everything and which can't be challenged. I think that's probably the line. Can you engage with people, and are they able to self-criticize their conspiracy theory, or is it just a belief system?
Whilst we're talking about them, I'm going to ask your opinion on a couple of conspiracy theories, if you would want to call them, which are mainstream in popular contemporary discourse. Does Putin have an organised plan to destabilise the West?
It's not really conspiracy theory, though. That's does Putin have a strategy, or is he a tactician? That's that question. Look, he's the leader of a massive state, which will have masses of think tanks and bureaucrats whose job it is to produce plan after plan. There will be multiple plans. Whether they're following one or they're improvising, we don't know. But the Russian system is a very academic kind of system, and they will always have theories, and they'll always have a plan, and they'll always have strategic thinking, and they have massive military and geostrategic sort of institutions that will produce plan after plan. Maybe then puts them in the bin and goes on going on instinct. But no, it's a highly academic. It's a culture where strategic thinking is a big deal.
Do you think a foreign power was responsible for Trump's election or the Brexit result?
That's kind of a question about media effects. To what extent does an online campaign, or in America more specifically, the hacking and leaking of the documents about Clinton, to what extent is that a linear thing? Oh, people saw that and voted a certain way. So most scholars of media effects say no, because their argument is you should never measure the 1%, you should measure the 99%. So Fox News, years and years of Daily Mail articles are just, in terms of methodology, much more significant than a tiny Russian campaign. One serious academic disagrees with that, and the problem is she's the most important academic in this field, Kathleen Hall Jameson. This is the woman who came up with the idea of the echo chamber back in the 1980s and 90s, or in the 90s really. She's the doyenne of media effects. And she says, no, that's the wrong methodology, quite the opposite. In a situation where all else is equal, you look at what was the 1% that changed it. So look, this all depends on your methodology, and academics just argue about this ad nauseam. But if you think you know anything about media effects and you ignore Kathleen Hall Jameson, it's a bit like, it's a bit like saying you're into football management but don't think Pep Guardiola is serious. I mean, she is the best, and she created a language for us. So I would be very careful to dismiss her.
In a country like the UK, one in which most of its citizens, I'd like to say, would consider to have a genuine multi-party democratic system, how does propaganda operate?
So, we have a new online space which is completely unregulated. So we had, when it comes, we knew our system, it was very, very faulty, but it was a weird mix of very partisan tabloidy media. I mean, let's be honest, kind of much more right-wing than left-wing. BBC trying to balance it all out. Then kind of institutions which were independent who we trusted, whether it was kind of like the Offices of National Statistics to give us information. And in this kind of mess of stuff, and we had very clear electoral rules about what is an electoral campaign, about how much you're allowed to spend. By no means was it a perfect system, but we had kind of a rules of the game, and regulation that kind of try to organize that. And as a citizen, you had at least a chance of trying to understand how people were trying to mess with you. Online is completely unregulated. We don't know who's behind what campaign. We don't know really anything about the spend to it. There's suddenly proxies become much more of an issue. I mean, even if it's not a political party doing it, who is this other weird organization? There's no understanding why you're being targeted with certain material. At least before we could see all the ads, they were pretty awful ads, very manipulative. We could see all of them because they were on posters and on TV. Now they're dark posts on social media. We don't even know how many different ads a campaign uses it. So kind of the field within which we can have a debate around propaganda has become dark, which means we can't criticize it or engage with it. And the whole kind of funding has become completely opaque. So we're in this kind of space where, kind of a murky space where we don't understand the forces that are shaping our information environment, which means we can't have a debate, we can't criticize them. Also, we can't really tell why we reach certain decisions because we don't know what were all the inputs. So that's bad.
In the case of, as comparable as they can be, superpowers, if all nations are meddling in each other's affairs through propaganda campaigns, whether overtly or covertly, does it really matter?
So I don't like this. I don't like a lot of the language that I've heard out of the US about meddling and interference, because that kind of seems to say a priori that information flowing across borders is somehow harmful. And I don't think that's the case at all. And we still want a world where information flows across borders and where we're all involved in a global village kind of conversation. I think that's fine. I think the problem actually is the deceptive nature of these campaigns. So the problem of the Russian campaign wasn't that Russia had a campaign in the US, but that they were pretending to be people in Tennessee. It's the Russian state saying, look, probably can't get involved in elections per se, but saying, look, here's what we think of Trump and here's what we think of that. That's part of information flowing across borders. So people aren't particularly worried about nonsense organizations like RT and Sputnik. It's the deceptive campaigns which are the problem. So I would draw a very big distinction between those two things.
You bring up RT and then deceptive campaigns. How deeply does propaganda propagate the media and those institutions which are conceived as not being biased?
So I suppose here you have to start getting into the definitions of propaganda. I mean, look, propaganda can just be any type of mass influence, which is kind of fine. Medical propaganda, getting you to stop smoking, whatever. Look, there's nothing a priori wrong with the Russian state having a TV channel that broadcasts Russia's position on stuff, internationally. The problem is that if it's a broadcaster, I think broadcasters should be regulated, and I think broadcasters do have to be, big broadcasters, have to be held to levels of accuracy and fairness and balance. So if they're not doing that, and RT are constantly being caught not doing that, they should face fines or even more stricter measures. So I think that's one thing. I think that another interpretation of propaganda is manipulation and deception. So as long as there's clarity and transparency about the sources of the information and why they're doing it, that would let one, at least in principle, engage critically, then I think that's all we need to demand. I'm all for a messy, cacophonous, often dirty information space. That's fine, but it has to be one that's interpretable. And the problem at the moment, it's stopped being interpretable.
So how do we make it interpretable?
Well, there's two things. There's a regulatory demand. So I think for online stuff, I do think we need to regulate types of behavior online. So not content, but behavior. So if something is an orchestrated, covert campaign, that should probably go down. That should probably not be allowed to exist. If something's an overt thing, saying, hey, we're the Russian government, we think this, I don't think anyone's really saying that should be taken down. With broadcasting, it's a bit different. Broadcasting has slightly stricter demands on the quality of the content. We have regulation in place already around that. It's just a case of, to what extent it's put into practice. But that exists. I mean, that's not a new idea.
But the internet.
So I think it has to be. If you look at the Russian campaigns in the US, so Russian campaigns in Britain weren't very big until Skripal, actually. But in the US, the problem wasn't the content. Some of the content was lies, like, Hillary Clinton is a dragon. But most of it was completely neutral. It was just like, come on, black people, don't vote for Hillary. It was like voter suppression, or it was geeing up Trump voters. It was strengthening polarization. But the content was often information neutral. What was wrong with it was that it was deceptive. So they were pretending to be local Americans when actually it was Ivan in St. Petersburg. So that's the problem. That it's taking something which is orchestrated, that is inauthentic, and that is a campaign and pretending that it's organic people. That is the problem.
So how does disinformation propagate outside of mass media platforms like the internet, like broadcasting?
Well, through politicians' statements more than anything else. That's by far and away the biggest one, is politicians mainstreaming this stuff. But then also you have whispering campaigns. There's been a lot of tools that you can use. But the internet has definitely turbocharged stuff. So that's where everyone's focus is now.
Beyond targeted disinformation campaigns, would you push to make the internet more transparent?
Yeah, I would. I think the targeted campaigns are one bit of it. So I think we have to have sort of public oversight of algorithms. I think we have to know much more about how our own data is used to target us. So how, which bits of our own information is being used. We have to have a kind of a 360-degree vision of all the different types of messaging that are used even by official political campaigns. Even the ones that identified I'm a conservative campaign for the election, you have to be able to see not just the ads targeted at you online, but all the ones they've done to see whether it's consistent. Yeah? So a lot more. The whole space has to become interpretable. We have to be able to see the whole means of production of the internet. The targeted campaigns are a part of that, but quite a small part.
Do you think that governments and nation states or private entities are the primary driving forces of fake news and disinformation?
Who did you make? States, and who are the other ones?
Nation states and governments, or private entities?
Well, as opposed to what? Aliens?
As opposed to business.
Oh, right. So that's a very interesting one, because something that's not talked about a lot is how much of this stuff is used in business. And if you think about the effects you could have on business, I mean, so these deep fakes, that everyone's worried about, like videos which look real but are fake. You can have a deep fake video. They're pretty easy to debunk, by the way, deep fake videos, So in politics, you'd catch it really, really quickly. The companies would catch it. It's just with the metadata, you can tell whether it's been manipulated. But if you could just have it for 30 seconds, deep fake of a CEO saying, oh, my stock market's crap, my company's, been a pyramid scheme. The stock market will react so quickly. You buy up the stock. I mean, it's been debunked 30 seconds later and you're selling again at a high one. I mean, you could, if you're good at stock market manipulation, you could do so much with disinformation and in tiny time frames. It would be too tiny in politics, So the scope for disinformation with financial markets is just massive. And I wonder whether there's a lot more, but we don't hear about it because all companies are really embarrassed about it because that makes them look very unstable. Yeah, if I was a disinformer, I'd be focusing on that. Definitely. I bet there's a lot more than we know about, especially campaigns and CEOs and management, undermining your rivals. I think there's going to be a lot. That's where a lot of this stuff started with. In Ukraine, the first troll farms were created by companies to do smear campaigns against other companies. So I think that was just a massive thing. But also, I mean, nasty civil society actors. So, you've been tracking a lot of disinformation campaigns or covert campaigns in Europe. And sure, it's Orban, it's Putin, it's all these people you'd expect. But then it's far-right activists who are just coordinating amongst each other, who are quite good at tech. Clearly have got a bit of a background in marketing, doing, Tommy Robinson campaigns and stuff like that, and coordinating across borders. So it's much more frightening than that. It's not just the states. It's also, dark civil society actors, if you can call the far-right civil society actor. Terrorist organizations, ISIS, excellent at this sort of stuff. So it's a free-for-all. Anyone can get involved.
How much of our personal data do the people making these and the biggest, let's say, campaigns have?
Yeah, this is again, we don't know. This is the problem, because it's such a black hole or a black box, I don't know, whichever metaphor you want, because we don't know what goes on inside the tech companies. There's always this leaks, it slowly leaks out. Facebook are like, oh, we may have given all your data to these people, and oh, they've just discovered a new one, that all these apps that were connected to Facebook, I think, were actually giving data, to data brokers. It just goes on, and because we have no transparency, we just live in an environment where we can't trust anything anymore. And that lack of trust eats away at kind of the possibilities of a deliberative democracy. So, the fact that I can't answer that question is terrible.
When Facebook gives away our personal data, are they being paid to do so?
Yeah, they're selling it on. It's their business model.
That's the thing that keeps them operable. That's the thing that keeps them free.
Their business model is sucking up our data and selling it on. They're a massive marketing research exercise.
So then, is it our responsibility as users to stop using these platforms?
Yeah, but it's very hard to. So in the Philippines, for example, if you buy a phone, it's hardwired to Facebook. Facebook is your internet. Maybe here, sitting in Hampstead, we could, leave Facebook for Wickr or something. Like some sort of, for some sort of elite platform that you have to pay for, and you may have more rights. That's just not possible for a lot of people. A lot of countries, Facebook is the model of communication because there's censorship, and actually Facebook's quite useful. I don't know. These companies have become. I don't like the term public sphere because it's neither public nor a sphere, but I don't know, the common zigzag, or, that's the role they've ended up playing. So simply saying you can leave it is just not much of a possibility in a lot of places. Also, other companies come along, we're still left with this challenge. No, I think what's broken down is the border between what is private, what is public. We have a kind of an agreement. This is our public self, this is our private self. And especially in England, we were very kind of focused on our private self being private. The social media by its very nature has broken that down. And what we definitely need is a new social contract saying, this is the new private and here's the new public. There are other people who say that if our data is being used, we should be paid for it. There's a whole movement around that. We haven't sorted that out. We haven't really defined what are the terms of engagement.
How do you think politics will evolve through prolonged disinformation campaigns in the future? And what would you do to avoid that potential outcome?
So listen, the problem is the lack of trust. It's not so much the disinformation as such. It's the fact that we have to have just enough trust in a democracy to be able to debate with each other and to kind of agree, okay, I lost that debate, you won, that's a consensus, you're in power. And that sort of stuff that Trump does, that Putin feeds, that we see kind of bubbling through in Britain as well, is like, oh, democracy's rigged, because the algorithms are rigged, or because, et cetera, that, that eating away at that social contract, that's incredibly dangerous because it's a very fragile cultural compromise that we trust each other enough to accept defeat in an election. So if that starts to whittle away, if that sense of trust disappears, then we just know what happens in other countries. We don't know what's going to happen here. But in that environment, people turn to strongmen. People turn to strongmen who can lead us through this dark and mysterious and murky world. So I don't know what will happen here specifically. In Britain, I think Britain's based on so many social compromises, but you can just see it fracturing and fracturing and fracturing, and Scotland drifts off and this drifts off, and we just can't have a constructive dialogue anymore. But globally, it'll be the era of these bastards. But you turn to bastards because compromise is broken down, you need them to deal with things.
Peter, thank you very much for your time.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.